Jan labeled his essay, "Bring Me Back My Spring." Between the gray fields and the dead trees stood an ancient house. It had been built at the beginning of the 21st century, and it still stood there, contrasting with the new lofts and eco-houses that had sprung up throughout the century. In what seemed to have been a flourishing garden many decades ago, leaves were dropping in a brackish pool. A lonely statue of Demeter, surrounded by 2 ash trees, was guarding this peaceful yard. The back door opened, and an old man came out, carrying a bucket and a rake. "Monday," he muttered. "Monday is gardening. A pointless occupation for a pointless day." And he started whistling, raking, and weeding. He took special care of the statue, cleaning the bust and the pedestal from all the fallen leaves. He dug with his right hand in a patch of dark soil and took a seed out. "Look at you. You're not natural. I shouldn't be planting you." The day went on, and his bucket slowly filled with leaves and weeds. The sun was setting when the old man sank into an armchair. "I should be planting tulips at this time of year." His arms started to shake, and a shiver went down his spine. An old lady was looking at him from the yard door. She turned back to the house, smiled, and greeted a kid. "Grandpa, what were you doing in the garden all day?" the kid asked. The answer came painfully. "I was wasting my time, gardening." The grandfather reached for something in his pocket, pointed at a pile of logs, and then showed his grandson what he had in his pocket. "Do you see those logs? They come from a cherry tree I had to chop this summer because of the acid rain. This seed comes from its brother, and it's the last one that I have." The kid watched the small seed with amazement. "How old is it?" "More than 20 years old, I believe, and it can still grow." "This is great, Grandpa. Why do you say it's pointless?" The old man sighed and sank deeper in his armchair. "I could plant it. Maybe a tree will grow, but it will never bear flowers or fruit." "I don't understand. I've never seen a tree with flowers or fruit." "It's a long story. Let's go into my study, and I'll show you something." The old man slowly climbed the staircase leading to his room. Once in the front of the door, he took out a small key and unlocked it. The room was dark and dusty, and bookcases filled every corner. The old man approached the only bare wall in the study. A painting was hanging on the wall. It showed a bee foraging an orchid for nectar. The flower was painted in a colorful way, showing the artist's love of nature, and each detail of the bee, from its hairs to its wings, was perfectly reproduced. "Do you know what this is, son?" He pointed at the flower and then the bee. The kid shook his head. "This insect here is a bee. It went extinct 34 years ago. This flower is a bee orchid. Its petals mimic the shape of a bee to attract them." The old man started to search the drawers of his desk and found a small glass box. A bee had been trapped inside. "Here, Sebastian, look at this poor dead insect. You'll never see any alive." His grandson received the box in his open palms, drew his eyes to it, and started to turn it around with great care. "It's beautiful. Tell me, Grandpa, why did they disappear? Couldn't we stop it?" The grandfather answered slowly while seated in his armchair. "They were weakened by an illness and the climate changes, but we continued to exploit them without letting them rest. They were one of the innocent victims of the ecological and economic crisis we suffered in the beginning of the 21st century." "Do you want me to explain the whole story? It's a long one, I warn you." The kid lay down on the rug and was quiet. "Yes, I want to know why no one saved them." His grandfather took a deep breath, smiled, and started speaking. "Firstly, you have to understand why bees were of great importance to mankind. Bees are natural pollinators. Flowers attract them with nectar, they drink it, and in return, they take some of the flower's pollen. They carry it on their hairs and bring it to the next flower. While the bee is looking for the nectar, the pollen she carries fertilizes the flower, and maybe it will germinate and bear fruit. The fruit itself carries the seeds of the plant inside, and when it falls on the ground, a new plant may sprout. It's quite easy. No bees, no fruit, no seeds. The plant will disappear." Now I'll tell you how we lost these incredible nature workers. Bees used to live in well-organized colonies that we called beehives. Man had used them since the dawn of time. At first, we only looked for the wax and the honey they produced, and we stole it from them. But with the industrialization that started 300 years ago, we found they had added value. In the Middle Ages, there weren't any problems with pollination because the fields were surrounded with forests and bees that had hives. When man started to cut the forests and sow gigantic fields, the plants needed bees to pollinate them. The beekeepers took their hives across whole countries to lend them to farmers in the flowering season. Hives started to die out in the end of the 19th century, but it was never on such a large scale as it happened in 1998 in France. The illnesses and parasites spread faster because the hives were left weakened after the long trips the beekeepers made them go on. The situation worsened in the United States in the winters from 2007 to 2009. Almost all of the state's colonies died that winter, and no one knew why exactly. Some said it was because of an illness, some others said because of travel, but neither side could prove it. It took the scientists 10 years to solve the problem and find an appropriate cure, but in 2019, half of the world's beehives had long disappeared. The cure worked well for a time, and it looked like a miracle. Sadly, as with every medicine, it only worked for a short period. 4 years after they discovered the cure, a new illness appeared and killed in just one winter 90% of the remaining bees. This slaughter could have been avoided if the governments had listened to the scientists when they finally found the cure. The head researcher told them, "This is not a miracle. This is not the end of the colony's disappearance. This is just a temporary medicine for the most dangerous of our bees' illnesses. If we don't stop exhausting those insects, another illness will appear, and it will kill them all before we're able to find a new remedy." Sadly, they didn't listen to him, and companies continued to rush all around the globe because the farmers paid a lot of money for those bees, even more now that there were only a few of them left. The massive colony collapse disorder of 2013 destroyed most Western beehives. Even my bees died, and I had only a few hives hidden in the countryside. As of today, they still haven't found a cure, and it doesn't matter anymore. There are no wild or domesticated bees anywhere on Earth. The 4 years that followed this mass extinction were the worst of my life. There were neither fresh vegetables nor fruit. The famine killed millions of people around the world, and because only cereal like wheat or rice were left, malnutrition killed another few million. Politicians found scapegoats, nobody listened to the scientists, and the GMO companies made billions out of self-pollinating vegetables and fruit. Do you understand how it happened now? The boy rose slowly, shaking with distress, and started sobbing a little. He snuggled in his grandfather's arms. "How can we bring them back, Grandpa? Is there any way?" The grandfather looked closely at his grandson in the eyes and told him, "Listen carefully. There's always a way of repairing a mistake, but you have to be strong and patient. I know that a laboratory kept a few hives in an isolated place. You have to ask them to release a colony and see if it survives. There are many people that wouldn't like to see the bees come back. Now you're too young, but I'll remind you when you grow up. I promise you, Grandpa, I'll find a way to bring our bees back." The old man hugged him tightly and whispered, "I trust you, son. You'll bring the spring and the wildflowers back."